Good day. This is my demonstration of my account type system that I made. First of all, I'd like to show you my build tool that I used. I used Maven. So Maven is amazing for keeping dependencies in check and keeping them all up to date by automatically adding or removing them as needed or updating any details within them. Whenever I add new dependencies to any of my POM files in my application, Maven automatically picks them up after refreshing, and when cleaning and installing, it automatically removes the old ones and install the new ones. So whilst that is refreshing, let me quickly wait for it, and then I can show you a build quickly and go on to the database. Let's quickly build it. So whilst this is building, you'll see that it automatically picks up any of the dependencies that I may have had and updates them, checks their versions. Then it also creates a new WAR file for me after that, which is then used to deploy to our web service, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Great, successfully built. So as you can see, Maven successfully built the dependencies that is found in all of my files. So next that I want to show you is my database. So my database connection, I'm quickly just going to show it inside of here in IntelliJ. You can see that my connection is active, and that is the only connection that I have here. It has two tables inside of it, namely my account type table and secondly my account transaction table. So my account type table is used only to keep track of all of my different files. So file entries such as what I mean by types of miles or bucks that it can have, account types. So this would be anything from plays to bucks to rands or dollars. So any member can choose any one of these depending on what account requirements they have and what needs to be shown or tracked for them, and it's only referenced with account type ID inside of our other table as a foreign key. So then how it basically would work is inside of account transaction, it keeps track of all of the entries that a single member, even on other members, can have. So this would be referencing something like, let's say member number 69 here has account type 10, and he also has an account of type 8 with different values of amount inside of them. So when you go to account type and you see 10 and 8 is respectively rands and bucks. So for this one member, he has two different account types. We can keep track of rands or bucks for him. Then account transaction amount is the amount he has respectively in each of these accounts, which would what would happen then is you take this value from the account table, account transaction table, and you would read it into your application. You'll see how much it is, and then whatever change should happen, this would be maybe he received some more bucks or rands, or he lost some if he spent them, and this value would be subtracted or added upon uh, with any other value in the application. Then the next thing that I would like to show is my Swagger file. So let's quickly go to that, where I can show you the services that I have on my accounts. So I have two controllers basically. They can be seen inside of my code here all the way down at the bottom. Account transaction controller and account type controller. Now, each controller has certain amount of functions such that executes the tasks that I mentioned previously with the database. So my account transaction controller has a post, a few gets, and one put. So I do not have a delete inside because we would not remove any entry in our account. The user's amount would just be lowered to 0 inside of his amount column. So firstly, the post is used to create new account transaction entries for users. So let's say, as an example, we have, let's try this one out first. We want to add a new an entry into our account transaction. So let's say user, this can just be left 0, it will auto update. Let's say we'd like to add bucks, for instance, to user number 69. And the amount of bucks that that user would like is, let's say we have 100 bucks now for first. He joined the account. Actually, you know what? Let us try something else actually. I think there is an entry of bucks inside here, and I just want to make sure. Yeah, okay. Let's try something new for him. Let's say he adds miles. So we can replace bucks with miles, the mnemonic that it needs, and we can press execute. And great, it executed. It seems it has failed. Okay, that's not too bad. Let's see what the reason would be. So these applications do have basic feedback on what may be the problem with our applications. Oh, but obviously it's not going to work. Our REST service is not up. Let me just quickly start that up again. Forgot to start it up. That's probably why it won't work. Let's see what the feedback is. Type error fetched failed. Yeah, the REST service is not up. Okay, no worries. Okay, so whilst that is starting up, let me go and just show you the rest, and then we can execute one of them each at a time. So still inside of our account transaction controller, I have my post method, which is used to add new entries into our account transactions. So this is if we usually if we get a new member, or if a new member has a new value or currency that he wants to and needs to be tracked. So this we can view by going to our get methods. So firstly, we have a get for our member ID and a get for our transaction ID. So maybe you'd be a member and you'd like to see how much rands you have, for instance. Then you'd be able to go to your get method and try it out. You can enter your member ID, execute it, and then it will run and it will get your actual values that you have for all your accounts. If you would go to your get for your transaction ID for a specific account that, just again as we saw in the table, has a specific transaction ID, so your rands account, there's a different transaction ID than your miles account. That information for your account would be retrieved. So let's quickly go to that post again. I think the REST service is up. Just open this up. Yes, quickly. Great, it's up. Okay. So again, we're just gonna try that miles again, just as it is. We didn't change any other values. And after saying execute, great, it gave me response body. It added miles. So miles are now in our account. Let's just quickly go back here. Update transaction ID. Great, there's the one that we just added. For account type 12, which is our miles, we added 100 units because it had 0 or nothing in it for a member 69. Great. So the other functions. Great. So member ID and transaction ID I could not get to work. For some reason it just did not work. The code for that was extremely hard for me to figure out, especially because the idea firstly was to find the account for a specific member and enter the account for a specific transaction, but that had a lot of complications with it. So sadly, my get methods for those accounts do not work. I can still try them, but they always give me the same internal error. Sadly, that does not work, but I can show that my code does support fetching a account transaction and also trying to modify account transaction. I also have the flow files for that. So Then the idea of the put would be to update. So because we don't have separate transactions for the same account for a user, we have a put method, what we would use to update the fields of a user. So this would be the new amount. So let's say we would take that exactly the previous transaction that we did, which was number 30, and we would try and add a new date for which it was created on and update the values. Then we would basically say, okay, so we don't want to change the creation date because his account's still created on the same day, but we would like to add a new amount to his account. So let's say in the meanwhile he had an extra 50 miles that piled up. Then you would go and use your fetch here, the get, to see the amount that he has in his account for that specific transaction. Take that value and use it in your application in the front end that you coded. Calculate how much the difference is that uh, he actually has gotten on top of his account. Add that together, which would be 100 plus 50 in this case, which means that the new value he would have in his account is 150. After adding that new value here, you'd say execute, and the idea again would be that it would run. But this one I actually had the most issue with the updates. So that one does not work sadly, but I really did try. Let's see this one as well. So sadly my account system only is able to post new values, uh, as you can see in the database that I showed you previously with that entry number 1 and extra account transaction ID 30. So let's quickly head over to our account controller. So firstly, before we start with this, sorry, account transaction controller covered adding a new miles for a user, subtracting miles for a user, basically by the same method, put and which you which functioned as an update, and by removing a miles as well in that same sentence, and also allowing to view those miles either via your member ID or the transaction ID that you're referring to. Next, our account type controller. This one is there to add new types of accounts, such as I stated before. So let's add a new one, and let's call this one, actually, let me just double check in the table which ones we already do have. Let's add a yen. Let's say we added a yen. So let's try it out. We can now say we want to add a yen to our database, and we would just describe it as yen as well. And let's say state the date as 2021 02 the 12th or the 15th. Let's try that one. Okay, great. Then we can try and execute that after the code has run already, and it gives us also gives us the output of our statements here. We can see that great success, go to a 1, the response in it has been successful, yen has been added. So the good thing with this one is we can fetch all of them. So let's quickly go and use this get that we have, and let's try and fetch our yen and see if we can find it. Wonderful, there it is again. And if you do double check in the response body, it allows us to show, sorry, that was the account sign. It allows us to show the select statement from HSQL that it auto-generated for us. So firstly, we can fetch all the account types that we have, and we can fetch them by a specific mnemonic that we specify, and we can insert as well. So let me quickly go to some of the code for that. A repository here has the SQL select statements for the fetching of our account type, and it also has the SQL selection statements for fetching of our account transaction and also This is by our primary key as well as by the member's ID. Sadly, these functions I could not get to work properly. Then secondly, our controller as all of the setup for our Swagger UI and how it should be laid out. Here you can see that I have all of my controllers set up. Then the next thing that I would like to show, check my notes here. So basically, we also showed that this application runs standalone now. It can completely run on its own without a front end here in Swagger UI. Now this can also be launched from anywhere if this database of my database were to be able to be, if I would put it up on a online service, and as well as this platform as well. So I also want to show you my source control next. So the source control that I used was a GitHub. I just used the integrated GitHub for this, and it worked amazingly. I have a few branches here, mainly my main, weekly changes, daily changes, and a backup, two backups that I have here. And you can see the last commit that I made was yesterday. Great. So this is how I used source control and version management to double check all my files, and whenever I wanted to commit anything, change anything new, or added anything, then it would be so great to be able to check my files for me, see if there's any errors and clashes that I would need to fix before I would merge these files. There is some error handling as well in the program. Now, most of the error handling is focused on the errors that the controllers show if there is something ever popped up that did not work or the database did not connect correctly. And we have a few try-catch blocks in some of our applications. Let's quickly see if we can find some. Right, okay, here's a F. No, that's not what we're looking for. Let's try, translators have some. Great. So I tried the try catches here, especially. I could have just added return, but that did not seem smart. So whenever I call these methods and there is an error because the constructor is violated or anything, there's other types of data that's entered there, they would always give me exceptions. Now, I believe that actually there's some more try catches that I have. It's also in the same files and is obviously not in the account type files. Oh yes, this is also what I wanted to show. This is the setup for my database application, or not for my database, but for my Swagger application and the details that it needed to show. I have no code coverage, but the last thing that I would like to point out is my layering that I used. So my whole application is divided between all of these layers, namely my system, my domain, my logic, my repository translator, and my web service. And as you saw, the files that are in each of them represent all the functions that my application has to do separately and separated in these ways so that if something were to be needed to change in the future, like my logic or like my connection to my database or repository setup, only those areas are addressed and only that area of code is accessed. Thank you very much for the time listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.